What's up everyone, what is Gucci? I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. I think there's something special about seeing a lion in real life or a tiger or penguins or any of these creatures you really only see on Animal Planet. Zoos can be fun, they can be cruel, they can be a source of many memes, RIP Harambe. All in all, the zoo is always a time and a half. Although no, I 100% do not condone caging wild animals, but I do accept sometimes they have a better chance of survival in captivity than they do outside. PSA finished. Sorry, I couldn't not say it. And just to preface this, most of the animals on this list attacked because people were in places they shouldn't have been, and usually animals are, not aggressive most of the time unless provoked. So yeah, let's just get into this right now because I'm very excited about this. So this is the top 10 scary zoo stories. Starting us off with number 10 is the lion attack. Catherine Chappelle was a very interesting American tourist. She was actually a special effects editor and had worked on Divergent, Captain America, and even Game of Thrones. Impressive resume, I must say. But anyway, in 2015 she visited a lion park in Johannesburg, South Africa. She was being driven through the park and was taking a bunch of pictures and decided to ignore the signs that warned to keep windows closed at all times. The tour guide driving said she rolled down the window on her own accord to take photos, and then a lion attacked her through the open window and mauled her to death. What's even worse is that the 66-year-old tour guide had a heart attack as he tried to fight off the lion. The situation ended well for nobody. I'm sorry, I feel bad for the tour guide, and I feel bad for Catherine, and I feel bad for the lion. Coming in at number 9 is Harry the hippo. I don't know why English zoos thought it was okay to employ untrained teenagers to look after the animals, but it was a pretty common practice throughout the 20th century. Let's just get these clueless people to handle these very large, unpredictable animals. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, let's ask Richard McCormick. Richard grew up in Coventry and started working at Whitley Zoo in 1966. He initially looked after the parrots, then it was the elephants, and then the bears, and finally it was Harry the hippo. One of the things he had to do was clean Harry's cage. One day he opened the door to his cage, but the safety barrier that usually came up was broken, and the door flew open and hit Harry up the bum. I don't know how it hit him up the bum, I thought maybe it hit him on the bum, but it hit him up the bum. Already we know this is going south very quickly. Harry grabbed Richard's head between his jaws and dragged him to the pool. He felt his ribs crack and he was terrified that he was about to die. His body was hanging from Harry's jaw and he had had his tusk removed a few weeks prior, otherwise that would have just gone straight through Richard. Thankfully, the head keeper heard Richard's screams and managed to hit Harry with an iron bar when he re-emerged from the water. Harry dropped Richard and he scrambled to safety, screaming and crying that his back was broken. In the end, his collarbone and ribs were broken and his liver had been punctured. Harry the hippo, you sound like a children's book character, but you turned out to be the complete opposite. At number 8 is the tuna explosion. That sounds like a lovely seafood dish at a restaurant, and I guess the story sort of ends up that way a little bit, kind of, maybe. This one's from Reddit user Electoric Television, who used to work at an aquarium in New Jersey. They had a massive ocean tank filled with yellowfin tuna, and the tank was massive, 780,000 gallons of water, 70 by 70 foot wide from overhead. Like, it was huge. Now, yellowfin tuna are some of the fastest swimmers in the ocean. They can reach nearly 45 miles per hour underwater, which makes for very cool viewing when you watch a school of them zipping from one side of a tank to another. One day the user was helping out at a dive show and the amphitheater in front was filled with kids on a school trip eagerly watching the tuna. The school of tuna were making their way fast from one side to the other, and all of them made the turn at the end except one, who couldn't do it fast enough, and it straight up slammed into this thick acrylic window at full speed and exploded. His words are not mine. Having other carnivorous animals in the tank like sand tigers, stingrays, sandbar sharks, loggerhead turtles, not carnivorous but still will literally eat anything, it became a feeding frenzy, and the kids were screaming murder as they were trying to run away and climb over each other. The girl with the mic has no idea what to do, the diver in the tank has no idea what to do, the tuna doesn't know what to do, nobody knows what to do, and eventually the audience is just sitting watching this unfold. The sharks ended up tearing the tuna to pieces and chunks of it were just floating in the tank all day. Filling our number 7 slot are the little ducklings. Out of all the stories on this list, this one legit surprised me the most. most. Redditor Transcendental used to work for a zoo, and this was one of their favorite stories. They claimed feral ducks were a huge issue for the zoo because they had a lot of birds anyway, so these random birds used to come to the zoo for free food and whatnot. With that came a lot of ducklings who would wander off without their mothers. And this is when the story takes a very bad turn. One day, a group of ducklings found themselves in the orangutan enclosure, and well, it's about to get really graphic. In front of a group of guests, the alpha female in the enclosure began to pleasure herself with one duckling by putting it in and out of her area, all while she was staring at the gathering crowd watching her. After seeing this, the alpha male, obviously having none of this, grabs another duckling and squeezes it until it pops in his hand, and then proceeds to throw it at the glass barrier where the guests were. The body of this little duckling is just sliding down the window, smearing it with blood as the kids are screaming and crying, and you guys probably are too, and I'm sorry. Now at number 6 is a suicide attempt. Yeah, I agree, those words aren't exactly the first things you think of when you think of a zoo, but here we go. In May of 2016, a 20-year-old man in Chile who suffered from mental problems and depression unclothed himself and jumped into a lion enclosure located at the Santiago Metropolitan Zoo. The man was mauled by the lions, and authorities had to kill 2 of the lions in order to save the man, who was quickly rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. A suicide note was also found in the pocket of his clothes, and that was obviously the reason he jumped in. Overall though, it was the zoo staff that were the saddest after the incident because 2 of their lions were killed really for no reason. Had everyone just followed safety protocols, no one would have had to die, but this man just had to jump in there, didn't he? I mean, obviously I've seen articles and read ways about how people can commit suicide, and I would never have imagined this would have been a possibility. And now I know. Coming in at number 5 is BINKY the polar bear. Now BINKY lived at the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, and the zoo pretty much had an elephant and some other donated animals until BINKY came along as an orphaned polar bear cub and essentially became the most popular attraction there, as well as a local hero. And that's exactly what 29-year-old Australian tourist Catherine Warburton expected when she visited the zoo back in 1994. She scaled and jumped over 2 safety rails in order to get a close-up photo of him, but it just didn't end well. BINKY stuck his head through the bars and grabbed her, breaking her leg and leaving bite wounds. It took employees 3 days to get Catherine's shoe back from BINKY after the incident. But in all fairness, I don't want to say she deserved it, but what did she expect after climbing not 1 but 2 safety rails that had been put in place to prevent incidents like this? Sadly for BINKY though, 6 weeks later, a bunch of drunk teenagers thought it would be an awesome idea to go into his enclosure and swim in his pool. No, no, no. One teen was hospitalized with leg lacerations after he was mauled. Again, I don't want to say they deserved it, but come on, how was that a good idea in any way, shape or form? I know they were intoxicated, but still. At number 4 are the wolves. April 18th, 1996, at the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, newly hired caretaker of the wolves, Patricia Wyman, was found naked and dead inside the wolf enclosure. Suspects seemed to be 5 adult North American grey wolves. So what led to this gruesome attack? The wolves had grown up in captivity all their lives, but were not socialized to humans, so whenever caretakers used to enter their enclosure, they kept their distance. Patricia had been inside the enclosure twice beforehand. However, the day before the attack, she told her fiance she was worried about the alpha male in there. The next day, she entered the enclosure by herself, and her body was found naked, covered in bite marks, and flesh had been ripped off from her extremities. The wolves growled at the officers when they entered the enclosure, which is a defensive behavior they do around food. The coroner ordered the wolves to be killed the next day and tested for rabies, which came back negative. But investigators just couldn't figure out why she would enter the enclosure alone despite her worries the previous day. One theory was she simply overcame her concern and went in. The wolves could have circled her, and she may have fallen over fallen trees and broken branches, and they just attacked her when she was down. Again, that's a lot of speculation and not a lot of fact, but humor me folks. Filling our number 3 slot is the tapir. Now I didn't know what a tapir was, so many of you may not either. Tapir is basically a big herbivore, and it sort of looks like a pig with a short nose trunk, but it's a lot bigger and its legs are a lot longer. I could go more in depth about this, but I can be David Attenborough later on, so let's move on. On the morning of the 27th of November 1998, zookeeper Lisa Moorhead was feeding a tapir called Melody. All of a sudden, Melody bit her left arm, but Lisa wasn't gonna go down without a fight. She fought back hard and suffered lacerations on her face, a punctured lung, and Melody ended up tearing her arm off from the mid-bicep area. Sadly, it was just too contaminated and mangled to be reattached. When I googled it, it looked quite harmless, so I was just hella surprised when I read the story. Now at number 2 is MEENA. Janet Coughlin worked at Seaburn Zoo when she was 13 years old. She initially used to work at the kiosk and chop fruit for people who wanted wanted to feed the monkeys. She remembered the zoo saying it was a disaster and the animals were locked in small cages and they were just going insane. One day in 1978, she was asked to help clean out 13-month-old MEENA's pit. MEENA was a Bengal tigress for the record. Janet had to hold the gate to the pit open while the zoo owner's wife brought out MEENA, who had been locked up for God knows how long. She came out and reared up on her back legs and came down on Janet. The cub began to claw her face, and at the time she thought she wasn't going to get away, but thankfully she managed to. She was completely covered in blood. MEENA had ripped open her face and she had a huge wound from her right cheek to her jaw. According to Janet, it was over so quick she barely felt it. A paper cut had hurt her more in the past. Alright Janet, I can't really relate with you with that one. She ended up getting 250 stitches in her face and it was swollen big time to the point all her food had to be liquidized just so she could eat it. She believes she survived because MEENA only intended to play with her and not harm her, which I also believe. And finally, at number 1 is the private menagerie. So from the name, you guys can guess this story didn't take place at a zoo, but at Terry Thompson's large private menagerie. Terry was a Vietnam vet who had been collecting exotic animals for years, but one day in October 2011, he freed dozens of his enclosed animals from his Ohio home and shot himself in the head. A little while later, his neighbor called the police after seeing a lion and bear just walking outside his house. If I saw that outside, I'd do a double take and be like, where the hell am I? The police finally came to the site and saw Thompson's body being eaten by a white tiger. They stormed the home with rifles and freely just started hunting the animals. I mean, is that even legal, by the way? Like, I swear they can't just open fire on animals they just find. I don't know, I'm probably wrong, but still, I just feel like that's not moral. The policeman went on to say the tigers were the hardest to deal with because they kept ambushing them even after being shot. By the end of the whole ordeal, 18 tigers, 17 lions, 6 black bears, 3 mountain lions, 2 grizzly bears, 2 wolves, and 2 monkeys were all killed. That is a massacre if I ever heard of one. And that wraps up today's video, guys. That was quite a gruesome list of events, I'm not gonna lie. If you were in the position of each of these people, which scenario would have freaked you out the most? Let me know in the comments below, people, as I'd love to read and reply back to you guys. And yeah, I'm your host Ayman Hassan, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!